Welcome to our study of Treasury of Precious Qualities, which is an instruction really for persons on the path. I don't think I would recommend studying Treasury of Precious Qualities to someone who is completely new to the notion of the Buddhist path, particularly in the modern context, because what's implicit in the teaching on that we're looking at here is really a much broader understanding of our reality, which includes the nature of consciousness as being something that can construct our reality, rather than us thinking about ourselves in terms of just being a brain, which has a finite number of years, and as soon as the brain is dead, that's the end of that. So within the present study, there's some perspectives that are kind of taken for granted. One is the mind's capacity for falling into delusion, and the other is its potential for actually not being in delusion, which we call enlightenment. And the present context of teachings takes into account the journey from delusion into the process of, you could say, healing or finding itself again, enlightenment, and all the considerations that are really basic to our present situation as persons who have been born as a human and who actually have the ideal conditions for extracting ourselves from delusion, and then taking into account the fact that we probably have a certain inertia with regards to how we think of ourselves in our situation as a human being, and simply highlighting the fact that this situation is impermanent. So that's something that we very often sort of forget. And then also understanding that what we do actually matters. So we very often think we're really just a victim of circumstances. We find ourselves in good or bad circumstances. And there's nothing much that we can do about it. The Buddhist teaching says there's a lot we can do about it, and particularly there's a lot that we can do in terms of how we accept our reality, how we can begin to be constructive in terms of our attitudes and also in terms of our actions. And then also today we're going to look at the situation of delusion and how it plays out. But all of this is pretty much with an understanding of the enormity of our present situation in terms of our luck, and also in terms of the potential that our situation holds, and also the incredible need to actually address our situation. So it's a big perspective. And so this very much is directed towards persons who are actually practicing the path and aware of the given situation. You could say this outlook really is based on the greater science of Buddhism. And as such, then the instructions that we're giving here sort of presumes that you're already familiar with this. So then with that as a given, then of course let's look at the actual text as such. We'll proceed the study with first invoking the lineage and particularly actually Jigme Lingpa. The source of love and compassion for all beings, who knows all that is knowable, emanation of Longchenpa, heir to a treasury of mind-tellers, sky-like yogin of the vast expanse of luminosity, Jigme Lingpa, at your feet we pray. So having invoked Jigme Lingpa, then recognizing that our present study really is getting to the bottom of extracting ourselves from delusion, and doing so not just for our own benefit, but really with an awareness of the suffering that exists within the condition of samsara. So we're going to look at, and I would like to congratulate you all for your courage coming here today. We're just going to, for the next few sessions, we're just going to be looking at the suffering of samsara, and that, you could say, is absolutely justifiable. If you're going to study medicine, you better get used to being around sick people, and you better get used to thinking in terms of what the lifestyles and our actions, actually how they impact on our well-being. If you're going to be a doctor, you're going to look at people coming in who have been exposed to accidents, who suffer as a consequence of bad life choices, or also persons who, in a complete innocent condition, actually are just suffering from the various ailments that are basic to the condition of samsara, the condition of a karmic body, and so forth. So, of course, here we are looking at this from the point of view, like we do when we study medicine, of what we can do about it. Now, one key element of the Buddhist teaching is really that we can do something. And so we're actually at the last section, the last verse in the study of karma, and that is the study of then what we can do to create good circumstances and what we can do to avoid negative circumstances. So there's been a lot of discussion with regards to actions that are creative and actions that are destructive, essentially what we call the 10 virtuous actions and the 10 negative actions. So there's a lot of emphasis there in practicing virtue, but also there is the understanding, and this is rather important for us also who have been sort of brought up in a society that's very analytical, sometimes rather cerebral, in the way there's sort of, the notion of going beyond good and bad and so forth, which is of course intrinsic to analysis philosophy and the general understanding of attempting to understand absolute reality. And that's where the nature itself, our ground nature, exists beyond the constructs of our relative perceptions. That's why we say that the nature, the true nature of who we are, is unconditionally good. The basic goodness, Buddha nature, the unconditional nature of luminosity that's basic to our being, that is, of course, the scope of the path of enlightenment. So having taken into account that we can eliminate and we can work with the relative confused projections that we call samsara and create good circumstances within that, we're also very much on top of understanding that even this relative reality is essentially a construct. And the Buddha's enlightenment is penetrating to the very core of our being. And so the entire path, while it's very much about creating the circumstances for happiness, it's also very much about us extracting ourselves from dualistic confusion altogether. And that's where here Jigme Lingpa, he says at the end of the chapter on karma, he says, while on the path, by means of concepts, merit is laid in, and wisdom, free of all such concepts, also is amassed. When these two are conjoined, the two veils are removed, and the two kayas manifest. Such is the interworking of profound and pure causation. So this is a biggie. This is important. And while we, of course, on a very simple level, associate the Buddhist teaching with acting virtuously and in terms of creating peace, happiness, cultivating compassion, there's also a profound insight into the nature of our reality, which understands wisdom, which is free from the ordinary concepts that we are entangled in. So the practice of the path, on one hand, creates the condition for happy experience, and also, and that's what we call the essentially good karma. And also we work with a kind of good karma, which we call merit, which are these circumstances that lead us to the path of enlightenment. So we would understand the path in terms, on one hand, accumulating merit, but also on the other hand, discovering that reality which is beyond any dualistic concepts. And that is what we then refer to as the freedom free from all concepts. So we would say then the freedom from all concepts, this brings about a complete insight into the nature of reality, which we call the Dharmakaya. And on the basis of the positive actions that we have accumulated on our path, then there's the ability to benefit other beings, which then is referred to as the form of manifestation. So that's where the Buddha, on one hand, is free in terms of understanding reality, but also on the basis of compassion manifests to sentient beings. And that is where we talk about the two kayas, Dharmakaya and Rupakaya. So in commenting on this then, Kangyur Rinpoche then says, those training in the four paths of the Mahayana accumulate merit through the dualistic practice of generosity and so forth, that is to say, in post-meditation. So there's the relative practice of what we call the four paths. Very often in the Buddhist vehicle, we talk about the 5 paths or the 10 bhumis, and the 5 paths, they essentially constitute of the 4 paths that lead to Buddhahood and then Buddhahood itself. So we could say that in fact the journey to enlightenment consists of these 4 paths: the path of accumulation, the path of joining, the path of seeing, and the path of meditation. And those that then journey on the path, they engage in actions that facilitate the actual journey itself, that they're the means for which we then can actually practice. We don't take it for granted that we have the education, that we have the leisure to practice. That requires a lot of extraordinary circumstances. And we don't really regard these circumstances as just being sort of a condition that we're thrown into or that just happens randomly. But this happens on the basis of actually having done actions that create these circumstances. So in the Buddhist teaching, we don't really believe in miracles or just sort of the things that just happen randomly. We believe that actions have an effect. And so it's not as if somebody who has merit is a better person, but it just means that this person has created the circumstances for that particular experience. Just like somebody who looks after their health, keeps fit and so forth. Yes, it's not as if they're better persons. They're just persons who have prioritized in a particular way and then have a particular outcome. So that's where we talk about the practice of generosity, referring to the practice of the paramitas. Let's see what the Padmakara people say. When we talk about dualistic practice, and I use this word probably terribly liberally, and it sounds maybe very mystical, but it just means that it's the condition in which we have reference points. We think in terms of me, other. We think in terms of our experience, and we think in terms of me and my experience. So whether we talk about duality or whether we talk about having a point of reference or we talk about concepts, is this place in which we identify in terms of our self and our experience. And that's where this is constituted very much within a framework of thinking of me. And then there's my experience, what is good, what is bad, and so forth. So this is within the condition of relative truth in which we then experience the duality. And we would say those who are on the path, while they're in meditation, we would say ideally they're free from these reference points, from these concepts, from duality. But in post-meditation, right up to the highest level, the Bodhisattva actually experiences dualistic phenomena. So that is while we're on the path of training, the first 4 paths of the Mahayana journey. So then Kangyur Rinpoche says, but the fact that the practice itself is considered to be illusory, in other words, that it is associated with a non-dualistic wisdom that realizes that subject, object, and action are without real existence, means that the accumulation of wisdom is accomplished at the same time. And this is an important point because what the Bodhisattva engages in terms of action in post-meditation is summed up in what we call the 6 paramitas. And this is where we sometimes see the word or the term, the phrase, generosity and so forth. We sometimes see this in vow of bodhicitta, through the practice of generosity and so forth, may I establish all beings at the level of enlightenment. And generosity and so forth means then the practice of the 6 paramitas. Now, the 6 paramitas, generosity and so forth, they're very interesting because they are generosity, discipline, patience, energy or diligence, meditation, and wisdom. They are actions that take us beyond duality. So as much as they actually are situated within our relative truth, something like generosity, that's actually something that takes us out of ourselves. It takes us out of our ordinary comfort zone. We extend ourselves to others. And if we practice genuine generosity, then it's something we do without strings attached. So that's where ordinary actions can actually take us beyond the ordinary agenda of self. It takes us beyond self-centering. So in this way, these actions that we are engaging in on the Mahayana path, they actually ultimately, they also facilitate this accumulation of wisdom. So this is really the beauty and the brilliance of the Mahayana path in terms of just the unity of skillful means or merit and wisdom. This is a big topic. I don't want to dwell too much on it because we'll have to go on, but this is something, and whenever I'm presenting Buddhist material, I'm always trying to sort of bring this point home, because it can sometimes seem a little bit difficult to grasp, but on the other hand, it's not impossible to understand. And in fact, it's something that we don't just need to look at as philosophy or abstract spirituality. It's something we can see living within our experience. When we see people who are genuinely generous, yes, they're active, but they're doing things for others. But there's interestingly also a dimension of selflessness that can be more or less sort of prominent. And so in a way, we could say the more someone is completely selfless in their generosity, the more wisdom there is there, the more there's a freedom from these dualistic concepts. And in fact, the more rich this generosity becomes. So the act of generosity and wisdom, we can see how they work inseparably. And that's where, don't think of wisdom as some sort of mystical state. Wisdom here, just means the absence of the delusion of self-centering, the absence of the delusion of self. So wisdom as such is something that's, you could say, innate to us. It's natural. And what we are having a problem with, the temporary condition of samsara, is we're having a bout of this delusional insecurity of self-centering. Now, Kangyur Rinpoche then says, as one grows increasingly habituated to the practice of these 2 accumulations of merit and wisdom inseparably united, the 2 kinds of obscurations, emotional and cognitive, are purified, and the 2 kayas, the Dharmakaya and Rupakaya, are actualized. So as we engage in merit, and that is something that, for example, generosity, it's something that diminishes the uptightness and the neurosis around self. The more we sort of get over ourselves and are out there and selflessly benefiting others, the less entanglement there is with our self-centered neurosis. This shouldn't be understood in a simplistic way. And of course, this is all in some way, very subtle. It's prone to subtle agendas, subtle habits, and so forth. But the principle, it's important to understand the principle that's behind this. So we're not saying something that's just simplistic, get over yourself and get out there sort of thing. We're not saying that. But at the same time, we also recognize the tremendous beauty and value of something like generosity in terms of essentially healing ourselves from our insecurity. So that's where the accumulation of merit, we would say, purifies emotional obscurations, and wisdom purifies the basic delusional condition, cognitive obscuration. And from that then, on the basis of our actions, compassionate actions, there is then the manifestation of, for the benefit of others, that we refer to as the Rupakaya, the form body that manifests in this world on the basis of those sentient beings, according to connections between the individual that who has attained enlightenment and those that are connected to this person, and also the Dharmakaya, the wisdom itself, which is the elimination of the cognitive obscuration. So in brief, as then it says here in the Ratnavali, the Buddha's forms arise from stores of merit, while, if briefly told, their form of truth is born from kingly treasuries of wisdom. So from merit, the Buddha's form, the Buddha's manifestation in this world arises, and from the accumulation of wisdom, the wisdom of, or the realization of the Dharmakaya is achieved, the form of truth. So Kangyur Rinpoche says, from the absolute point of view, beyond all conceptual construction, the karmic principle of cause and effect is a mere imputation. So from the point of view of the absolute reality, a bit like you could say, from the point of view of when we've woken up from a dream, we can see everything that went on in the dream in terms of the what played out, causes and effects of experiences we had. They're in fact all just conjured up by the dreaming mind. There's no ultimate reality about it. But then again, as long as we're in the dream, it appears very real. So when we're outside of the dream, we could say that's the absolute point of view. But of course, while we're in the dream, yes, then we do experience the relative truth of the experiences of the dream. Kangyur Rinpoche says the fact that the process of cause and effect, the fact that the process of cause and effect, as this is asserted in the common vehicle, has no true existence, points to the profound principle of dependent arising, which ordinary people find difficult to understand. And that is where we should understand that this reality that plays out in our dream, that plays out in our ordinary experience, is in fact continually premised on things that are shifting. We're constantly part of a river of experience. And as such, there's nothing in this experience that stops. Everything is part of what we call a stream of dependent arising. Everything arises on the basis of cause and effect. They have no intrinsic, enduring reality in and of themselves. So this is a biggie. And that is where the Buddha then sort of nudges us and says, you know, it's just like a movie. It's just like a dream. It appears, yet it has no reality. And that is where we can understand these appearances that happen, all our experiences. They come about due to actions. They come about due to actions actions and their results. So that's the relative truth that we experience, and that is the nature of dependent arising. But the fact that also that all of this is a web of causes and conditions, it means that it has no inherent reality whatsoever. And so we would say, the moment that we understand really the nature of dependent arising, we understand the nature, its empty nature, the shunyata principle. And as such, we would say shunyata and dependent arising is, you could say, synonymous. The fluid nature of our reality actually speaks loudly about the empty nature of reality. So there's appearances, and yet they have no inherent absolute truth. As it is written in the Samdhinyamochana Sutra, deep truth is not for the naive. The conqueror set forth the non-dual and the ineffable. But children straying in confusion amuse themselves with doctrines, staying in duality. So that's why we would say the ultimate nature of reality is beyond any doctrine, is beyond any attempt to pin down or pigeonhole or objectify, conceptually construct the nature of reality. And that's why the nature of what we're engaging in here is not about philosophy. It's not about science. It's about experience. While philosophy and science can be very helpful to give us faith in this project, the actual experience of the deep truth is not the scope of the intellect, it is the scope of wisdom. So that is this wisdom that we refer to as non-dual and ineffable. Yeah, that's sort of a big one, huh? To be hit with first thing here on a Sunday afternoon. But I'm afraid it is, you can say, part and parcel really of the Buddhist teaching, and it enables us to have a big perspective of what we're doing. And particularly now, we're going to look at suffering, which is very much about understanding how suffering plays out. And it's important to understand that as much as suffering plays out in terms of our confusion, we can do something about it. And that's why it's important for us again and again to come back to this understanding of what we're really talking about here is healing the condition of samsara. But as we're doing that, we're not afraid to talk about, there's consequences of our negative actions. When I grew up, we were sort of, all kids were drilled at a certain age to watch terrible movies about the damage that comes from smoking. And actually, it hasn't gotten better, because I think anybody who smokes nowadays, they buy a pack of cigarettes that sort of has, the Jolly Roger on the package and warnings, non-apologetic warnings about the consequences of the health consequences. So, I mean, the thing is, the choice is ours. And so we can extract ourselves from confusion. And that's particularly now, where we have every condition at hand. It makes a lot of sense to actually be clear on how important it is to extract ourselves from confusion, what the nature of confusion is. So we're establishing a set of values, really, in terms of appreciating what we can do right now. But it's very much like I said, if we study medicine, we're going to inevitably be studying the particular conditions of suffering as they manifest. So we're now looking again the path of beings of medium scope, correct conduct in relation to the Four Truths. The Four Truths being understanding suffering, understanding where it comes from, and then abandoning the cause of suffering, and then understanding that it's curable. We can extract ourselves from suffering, that's cessation. And finally, there's a path to do that. So here we begin with understanding the suffering of samsara. So the Four Truths. So let me just read then the root text here. Let's see, it's just number 1, yeah. So the root text reads, "We who board the supreme ship of higher realms escape for now the dreadful monster's tongue, the evil destinies. But since we have not reached the dry land of our freedom, in a captain we should place our trust, the Four Truths of the Noble Ones." So the Four Truths we have all across the board in the Buddhist teaching. Again, it's understanding this situation in which the suffering can be cured through the path. And right now we're on board that ship that's taking us to that place. But the ship is something that really is premised, that we have a seafaring vessel, is actually the nature of the higher realms. Otherwise, the lower realms, that's not a place where we really have the leisure. So we should appreciate this present condition that we have. And until we reach the dry land of freedom, we're going to we depend on this ship of the higher realms. And that's where, as we are living in the higher realms, we shouldn't be distracted by the sort of apparent comforts of this condition, and very much refer to the clear seeing of the captain, the four noble truths. So Kangyur Rinpoche comments, beings born in the higher realms of gods and humans possess for the time being a wonderful opportunity, the chance afforded them by their fortunate existence. This is like a ship in which they can sail to freedom over the ocean of samsara, and which has, for the moment, eluded the ferocious jaws of the sea monster waiting to drag them down to the lower depths. Nevertheless, they have not yet reached the dry land of liberation, which is free from suffering and safe from the flood of defiled emotions. Indeed, they have not even attained the stages of the path of joining, as referred to in the saying, "The peak is won, the roots of virtue unimpaired, acceptance gain, no fall to lower realms." So here we're referring to this place in which it's actually referring to the what we call the 5 paths. And on the first path, then the path of joining, then we have these two, we have 4 stages, but we have 2 of them then, the peak and acceptance, which actually means that we have all the right conditions there and looks like we're going to be okay thus far. The commentary says, a practitioner on the path of joining. Sorry, this is not the first, but this is the second. So we have the path of accumulation, and then the second is the path of joining. A practitioner on the path of joining passes through the 4 stages as the realization of the path of seeing approaches. These are warmth, peak, acceptance, and supreme mundane level. Until peak is gained, the practitioner is still prone to negative action. This is discussed at length in chapter 6. Okay. So, sorry, I should have actually just stopped for questions at the end of the last chapter. And someone's asking, I have asked this question before, so apologies for repeating. Will the accumulation of merit naturally bring forth? My friend Mark is bringing me pizza. How good is that? My friends next door are making pizza, and somebody just delivered some freshly made pizza. Should we end the session early? No, I'm just kidding. So the question here is, I had asked this question before, so apologies for repeating. Will the accumulation of merit naturally bring forth wisdom, or do we need to explicitly develop our wisdom by various means? And which are these means? For example, is it sufficient to recite the Manjushri prayer, Dharma study? But regarding Buddhist study, I find there is a small danger of becoming too fixated on views sometimes. Well, this is all really good questions, but I would also say this is accounted for. Actually, I'm just going to take you back to the very end of the last chapter, because actually there it makes a really important point, which is actually, so it says here, the fact that the practice itself is considered to be illusory, in other words, that it is associated with non-dualistic wisdom that realizes the subject and object and action are without real existence, means that the accumulation of wisdom is accomplished at the same time, meaning at the time that we're engaging in the paramitas. So you're thinking, how do we accomplish this wisdom in terms of, rather does merit also, when we're accumulating merit, how to accumulate wisdom? Are these separate practices? Well, that's actually the point being made here, is actually it's in there. So will the accumulation of merit naturally bring forth wisdom? Yes, it does, if we practice merit in terms of the 6 paramitas, generosity and so forth, because they are paramitas. They take us beyond confusion. And then you say, oh, do we need to explicitly develop our wisdom by various means? Well, it is true. There are all sorts of practices, such as reciting the names of Manjushri prayer, Dharma study. Interestingly, while they are practices of, you could say, that emphasize wisdom and also the study of the views and so forth, they actually also require these 6 paramitas. For example, studying requires that we give our time. While we're studying, we need to be focused. Discipline. While we're studying, sometimes we don't always understand it. We have to hang in there. Patience. We actually have to persevere, right? Diligence. And we need to actually, to do that properly, we need a calm mind. And it also brings about, it's involved with the culture of calm mind, and to truly understand what is actually being spoken about, wisdom. So you could say the Mahayana path in all its aspects really unite these 2 aspects of merit and wisdom. And yes, there's definitely a danger. It's not just a small danger, becoming too fixated on the views. Gosh, yes, that's the thing. That's why it's so important that we combine study with practice. Otherwise, it becomes cerebral, and we would say the medicine turns into poison. Particularly when we, for example, study teachings on shunyata and so forth, then there's the danger that we could begin to think, oh, it's all just empty and so forth, or we could be too fixated on just philosophy. So that's where it's important that we sort of get over the sort of nerdy fixation with regards to all the words and all the concepts and so forth. We need to meditate. So that's where even within particularly Vajrayana practice, we could get too caught up in all the ritual. We could forget to meditate. We could just be caught up in the ritual aspects without actually really engaging this non-dual wisdom. So all along the board, really, there is that danger. And all along the board, if we practice the teaching as it should be practiced, how it's intended, we have this unity of the accumulations of merit and wisdom. Okay. So then, with regards to the Four Noble Truths, we, as our captain, we are presently on a journey guided by the Four Noble Truths. So it says, so us presently on this voyage, people in this situation should rely on the teaching of the Four Noble Truths, metaphorically referred to in the root verses as a captain. The Buddha taught these verses at Varanasi, explaining them in three ways. First of all, he simply pointed them out, saying, "This, O monks, is suffering. This is the source of suffering. This is cessation. This is the path." So that is what, so then this is the path. Later he referred to their causal aspects when he said, suffering is to be understood. The source of suffering is to be discarded. Cessation is to be realized. The path thereto should be followed. Still later, he indicated their resultant aspects with the words, O monks, when you have understood suffering, there is nothing more to understand. When you have discarded the source of suffering, there is nothing more to discard. When you have realized cessation, there is nothing more to realize. When you have followed the path, there is nothing more to follow. So this is the ways in which we can first appreciate the value of the Four Noble Truths, which is essentially like when we're diagnosed with an illness that's curable. We'd say, here's the illness, this is where it comes from, it can be cured, and this is how you cure it. On the basis, that's where we can say, okay, I trust this. And then when we apply it, then it is to understand what's going on, and then actually to be proactive in terms of abandoning the cause of suffering and understanding that we need to abide by the course of remedy. And then once we're cured, the result then is that we have abandoned the source of suffering, and there's no more any, you say, course of remedy to be followed. So then so that's overall. Now we begin with the truth of suffering. Then first there's the all-pervasive nature of suffering. We're going to look at three kinds of suffering. One is the sort of the ground, duality itself, delusion. Out of that then comes a situation in which we struggle by the fact that we never can get used to the fact that reality cannot be grasped. And so we're always frustrated. We can't hold on to phenomena. We always want to hold on to something, and things by nature are such that they cannot be grasped. And that's the frustration of change. And within this condition, ourselves find ourselves struggling with reality, and very often, even if we get what we want, we lose it. And on top of that, we get what we don't want. And so this is referred to as the suffering of suffering. But we first are looking at then the all-pervasive nature of suffering that's basic to the samsaric conditions. And that's where Jigme Lingpa says, we should understand the truth of suffering. In all the 6 realms of samsara, high or low, no place is there but is entrapped in misery, of pain, of change, of all-pervading suffering in the making. Okay, I'm going to try to read that a bit more fluently. We should understand the truth of suffering. In all the 6 realms of samsara, high or low, no place is there but is entrapped in misery, of pain, of change, of all-pervading suffering in the making. Okay. So basically, what is being said here is whether we're in the realms of bliss or whether we're in the realms, the lower realms of intense suffering, there's nowhere where we don't have this condition of the 3 sufferings, essentially, but particularly of what we call all-pervasive suffering, that there is this ground of delusion, of duality. And this permeates all the, you could say, perceptions. Kangyur Rinpoche then comments, we should understand that the 6 states of samsara, the 3 evil destinies below and the 3 happy destinies above, are utterly permeated by suffering. The suffering of suffering, the suffering of change, and all-pervading suffering in the making. The suffering of suffering is simply pain as such, as in the case of a leper who, in addition to his disease, is afflicted by blisters. So this is just where pain upon pain. The suffering of change refers to pleasure or happiness, for this is always liable to transform into pain, as when someone is bitten by a poisonous snake while walking in the garden or gets intestinal worms after eating delicious food. So that's where things could be blissful, and they could also turn into, they could be blissful, and then all of a sudden we have what we don't want. Of course, a point that Tansi Kangyur often makes is that we could actually make friends with all these aspects. And the way through which we could make friends with impermanence is that also means that when we have suffering, it could change into happiness. But there is the basic underlying condition that we're continually vulnerable as long as we have this fundamental delusional fixation on a self. And then Kangyur Rinpoche then says, all-pervading suffering in the making refers to the fact that due to the defiled emotional consciousness that underlies our every action, external and internal suffering is latent in everything we do. It is, in fact, the product of ignorance. Nowhere in the whole of samsara are beings free from the toils of these 3 kinds of pain. So the last one, this is something that's basic to our entire condition. Some people might actually be sensitive to this. The mere fact of living with this insecure sense of self that is always vulnerable in terms of getting what we want, and even when we get what we want, we know it won't last, and being sort of affected by discomfort or pain of what is unwanted. So we're all the time prone to this condition in which there's never really any relief. And that's the basic all-pervading suffering. So Kangyur Rinpoche then, referring to the pain of the pain of change, and also the all-pervasive suffering, he says then, nowhere in the whole of samsara are beings free from the toils of these 3 kinds of pain. In the 3 lower realms, manifest suffering predominates, the fruit of negative action. In the states of humans and the gods of the desire realm, happiness manifests as a fruit of virtuous actions, and therefore the suffering in this case is mainly of the 2nd kind, the suffering of change. Finally, in the 2 higher dimensions of form and formlessness, and these are these sort of very refined spiritual abodes of samadhi, beings experience the neutral state devoid of bliss and pain, which is the result of unwavering actions. So this is actually being able to sustain states in which the mind is just completely pacified. So it's important to remember then that these are the conditions of samsara. And sometimes people would say, well, Buddhists, don't they say that life is suffering? And that is not what the Buddha is saying. But the Buddha is saying, as long as we're caught in delusion, then there's suffering. So samsara is not a place. It doesn't mean this world that we're in is samsara. but it is the way that we engage with our experience that is samsara. So from the point of view of the Buddha, this is a pure realm. From the point of view of a sentient being, this is, dependent on their particular, what we call karmic projection. This is one of the realms of samsara. So samsara is entirely contingent on confusion. So the Buddha did not say that life or reality is suffering. The Buddha pointed out, just like a doctor would say to someone who is engaging in the causes of a particular illness, there is illness when you're doing this. You need to stop. So that's where the Buddha, as the physician, comes in and says, this action will lead to suffering. So in this way, suffering is not something that's sort of a given or something that just is there. It's something that's created on the basis of the cause of suffering, which is ignorance. And the Buddha's point is, this is curable. So if you like, what the Buddha is saying is, life in its actual nature is enlightenment. But because we are blind to our true disposition, then we have this half-life, which is then samsara. And that needs to be dealt with. And that's where the Buddha is not really beating around the bush. He says, you got a problem here. So you need to deal with it. And you might say, yeah, but isn't my nature naturally pure? Am I not naturally healthy? The Buddha said, yeah, you might be naturally healthy, but right now you've damaged your health. You have a condition that is not healthy, and this is called samsara. And right now there's every opportunity to be free of that. So that's where the Buddha is talking Turkey, is talking straight language and saying, right now there's suffering and something needs to be done. You need to abandon the cause of suffering. So at that point, it makes, especially if the patient is a bit dense, then it makes a lot of sense to elaborate on how suffering plays out. And this is what we're doing here. Just like I was saying when I was a kid, we had movies played about how you damage your health if you smoke tobacco and so forth, right? So here then, there's a quote. This is from Yönten Gyatso's commentary on the Yönten, another commentary on the Treasury of Precious Qualities, where Yönten Gyatso says, in this condition, many negative karmas, meaning many negative actions, previously accumulated, continue to lie dormant in the mind, so that even though the painful result is not yet manifest, it is always there, ready to emerge. Also, the results of the previous positive actions of beings in the form and formless realms can ripen in the realm of desire, where they will bring forth the suffering of change. Thus, the sorrow of the form and formless realms is principally that of all-pervading suffering in the making. So if I'm not wrong, this was from Yönten Gyatso, yeah. Is it too late to attend the course? Vipam's Sword of Wisdom. No, it hasn't begun yet. So you're earlier. So this will be on Wednesday mornings, Australian Eastern Standard Time, or I think it's daylight saving time presently, 9 to 10. Yeah, Sydney time, 9 to 10. But probably won't be for a few more weeks. Yeah. The conditions that perpetuate suffering. So here then, Jigme Lingpa in the root text says, yeah. The origin of pain. So now we're talking Four Noble Truths. We talk about suffering. Now we're talking about the cause. The origin of pain, the demon of desire that rears its head to strike, entwined with poisoned objects of desire, contrives a prison whence there's no escape, the breeding ground of weariness and woe. So that's where we have to acknowledge we're pretty conditioned to subscribe to these habits, these ignorant habits that bring about suffering. So So Kangyur Rinpoche says, going right to the root of the matter, the root of our present and future suffering are the harmful mental patterns of desire and aversion, which, prompted by our clinging to illusory phenomena, set in motion destructive karmic sequences of cause and effect. This demon of desire is like a venomous serpent rearing up to strike. Okay? So what we're talking about here is that we have a fundamental delusion, and that's what we call this ignorant condition in which we then cling to illusory phenomena. When we cling to illusory phenomena, then we have likes and dislikes, these mental patterns of desire and aversion. Essentially, we want what's good for us. That's really the problem there. And we're angry about it or dislike what we don't want. So, but all of that is entirely on the basis of us clinging to the illusory phenomena. For example, if we watch a movie where there's all sorts of dreadful things happening, we actually have the comfort and the detachment of knowing it's a movie. I mean, we might get entangled, but essentially there is an understanding that this is an illusion. We, however, don't have that. We fixate in our delusion, we fixate on the reality of ourself and our perceptions, illusory phenomena. And that's then that generates all our reactive patterns, which we call then the destructive karmic sequences of cause and effect. All of that comes back to this self that is very much about me. So this is what's here referred to as a demon of desire. Now, of course, this is entirely just a question of delusion. But the thing is, because it creates suffering, we refer to this in terms of being a demon. It's something that is like a venomous snake. It's something that causes our suffering. The proposition here is that we can do something about it, but we need to accept that this is something that we need to take serious. External objects, shapes, sounds, and so forth are a kind of poison. They seem pleasant when they are experienced, but later reveal themselves as the source of pain. So we go after things thinking that they'll bring about happiness, but they rarely do. Kangyur Rinpoche says, the mind is adulterated by these outer objects, for it merges with them inextricably in the same way as iron is suffused with heat when it is glowing in the fire. Because they lack the insight to appreciate the defects implicit in the attitude of craving, beings have languished in the prison of samsara and have never discovered how to escape from it. This is indeed our terrible predicament, and sadness wells up when we reflect upon it. So this is where this should lead to a sadness, and even we sometimes say a disgust with this condition of our delusion. But it's not a question of being angry with ourselves or disgusted with ourselves, but it's something about us no longer wishing to be fooled, and also understanding the predicament that others experience. So it should also bring about compassion for others. Here the footnote in terms of the sadness about this condition says, sadness, cure, in this context is considered a positive quality. Its importance lies in the fact that it gives rise to renunciation, the desire, indeed, the decision to leave samsara. So this cure brings about what we call in Tibetan Yinjung, which means certainty. We do not want this anymore, and we have the determination to be free. I've said this many times, but we often translate this as renunciation, and people might think, well, renunciation is giving up their jobs or leaving their family behind or going to the mountains and so on. But that's really only secondary. The main point, and this is where us who cannot leave our reality behind us presently, we need to understand the main point is really about our determination to understand how delusion, being fooled and deceived by our ignorance and these sort of our naivete with regards to our projections, how this needs to be addressed. We need to be determined, and that's really the foundation of the path. It is this determination to be free. Okay, I think we'll stop at this point. Let's see some questions. So, what will that be in place of the Bodhisattva's Guide's study? Yes, that's right. That will follow the Bodhisattva Guide study. Yeah. What can we do about choosing not to suffer when the ignorance is presented in our mind? We can practice the Buddhist path. So that's where we have ignorance. That's so true, but we're not destined or even obliged to follow our ignorance. And that's where the practice of the path, the you could say the practice in terms of good lifestyle, the practice of meditation, and the cultivation of wisdom, that is what can remedy this ignorance. And someone says, the demon is so darn convincing. Yes, for us, initially it's convincing. As we travel the path, it becomes less convincing. And that's why it's very important for us to sort of actually reach from what we call the path of accumulation into the path of joining, because once we reach the path of joining, then we're not that impressed with that demon. It doesn't really have the, you could say, the seductive power over us. Please distinguish the difference between warmth, love, and desire. Well, warmth, love, if we're talking Mahayana, is the selfless nature of mind, which is, we could say this, the Trungpa Rinpoche refers to as this warmth without a centralized radiator. So that's just simply the nature of reality. The nature of our Buddha nature is, the Buddha nature we would say is endowed when it's fully manifest with the qualities of love, wisdom, and strength. And so this is the love of selflessness. Desire, that's the love of selfishness. And that's generally what sort of brings about what we say initially is a degree of openness into us closing down. That's where we all of us, when desire, when love, when selfless love is sort of filtered through the agenda of ego, and as such as desire, then it generally doesn't last that long. And as we were pointing out here, it actually, it ultimately just leads to further suffering. Hi, Jakob. I finally watch. Hold on. Okay. I finally watched Return to Gandhi Road. What a wonderful film. And Kangyur Rinpoche is amazing. Did you spend much time with him? No, I never met Kangyur Rinpoche. Strangely enough, I happened on his cremation. And I actually was walking on Gandhi Road at the time when Kangyur Rinpoche passed away and he was about to be cremated. And I saw there was a Tibetan house and I just snuck in as a thief, uninvited. I didn't know anybody. I just thought this place looks interesting. And I just walked in there. And so I happened on Kangyur Rinpoche's cremation ceremony. I was there for some days before he was cremated. But anyway, I've had the fortune to study with Kangyur Rinpoche's children, his sons and daughters, and regard them as my teacher. And we still have a lot of great, as you can see in the movie, a lot of, you could say, Kangyur Rinpoche's heritage. His legacy is very much with us. When are we going to change to Saturday? 19th of March. That's when the course Living is Dying begins, and that takes the Sunday slot, and we'll then meet on Saturdays. But I warmly recommend the Living is Dying. So I hope you can handle 2 programs over the weekend. They're both just, I think, 1-hour programs. Thank you for your clear and practical explanation. I wish I could follow more of your programs, but I just don't have the time, unfortunately. I know I'm terrible there's so much programs still going on. I apologize. By the way, there have been so many people who said, we're getting so much mail from Siddharthas and Zen. So we're actually thinking about maybe sort of toning down the amount of mails a bit. So some of you will be happy to hear that. Are merit or wisdom the same or different? Yeah, we talk about 2 accumulations. And while they're very much related, you could say there's an overlap, intrinsically they are fused, then we do think of them in relative truth in terms of 2 accumulations. Yeah, merit and wisdom. The SIA flyer sent out by email says Thursday evenings from Thursday, March 17 for Sword of Wisdom. No, it's that's the life and teaching of Jigme Lingpa. I mean, anyway, thank you for bringing that to my attention. I forwarded to you in case there's a mistake in Flyerland. It sounds like there's a mistake in Flyerland. Thank you. Thank you actually for looking out for these mishaps. No, there will be a course starting on the 17th of March on the life and teaching of Jigme Lingpa. Because Jigme Lingpa is so essential really in terms of what we practice, particularly in the context of the practice for the practitioners, then it's really important to have that, particularly those who also engage in Vajrayana practice. In terms of literal external renunciation of desires, such as giving up alcohol, TV, and so on, how should one know how much is appropriate? Surely we need some external renunciation as a support for our mindfulness practice until we have strong stability. But also, would being too extreme lead to spiritual materialism? These decisions seem difficult without the close guidance of a realized teacher. Not really. I would say we kind of know. We know when we're sort of indulging, and so it's probably, you know, excess alcohol, excess TV, and so on. We kind of know when we're going down that route, and we're under no obligation to neither drink nor watch TV. We could very well practice. Nobody's telling us not to. Nobody's telling us that we have to watch TV or drink. But on the other hand, what's good is to be flexible when we're around other people, not to view them as sinners because they're watching TV or they're drinking or whatever. So just be easygoing with others. But ourselves, we're under no obligation to sort of pursue this. Unless we have a condition of some addiction and so on, then of course, then it's complex. But I think we probably could do without either of these. That's not too extreme. Where can we watch the film Return to Gandhi Road? I'm not entirely sure. I think it's possibly accessible on the web, but it also depends where the region you're in. You can try to Google it. No, please don't tone down these precious treasures. Okay. What's that? You say, yes, you're right. So sorry. Oh, does that mean that there actually wasn't a mail that went out that says Sword of Wisdom starting on the 17th of March? Well, in that case, then that's good news. I was a bit worried. All right, but it is confusing because Sword of Wisdom was written by Jigme Lingpa, and the other course is about Jigme Lingpa. So there's a little bit of Lingpa happening in both cases. Okay, there wasn't such a mail. Misread. Okay, good. Relief. Thank you. Gandhi Road, please, in the Eastern Hemisphere can watch it on. Okay. In the Eastern Hemisphere, you can watch it on online.diff.co.in. All right. Okie dokie. Anyway, yes. All right. Should I put that up then? Okay. Let's see if I can. Yeah, I'm just going to type it out. Okay. So. So apparently, so someone's saying, okay, Return to Gandhi Road is available on Stan in YouTube as pay-per-view. Okay. All right. So let's just see here. I'll unofficially say, what is it again? Online.diff. diff.co.in. Yeah. Okay, that's where you can. This will be. I hope it's not a pirate site or whatever. Anyway, that's a place where you can watch it for free. It seems so. There you go. All right. So I think we'll conclude with dedication. Not a pirate site. Okay, cool. Any European links? I don't know, but I would say support the makers of the film and pay for it, right? Okay, de rien. Okay, let's we conclude here and dedicate. Through all our births, wherever we may be born, may we be endowed with the 7 good qualities of the higher realms. As soon as we're born, may we meet with the Dharma and have the freedom to practice it properly. At that time, may we please the holy gurus and practice the Dharma throughout the day and night. Realizing the Dharma and accomplishing its essential meaning, may we cross the ocean of existence in that life. Thoroughly teaching the holy Dharma in this world, may we never tire of accomplishing the benefit of others. By this vast benefit of others, without partiality or bias, may all attain Buddhahood together. Thank you very much.